So I started watching this horror mystery thriller with my family and continued watching it with my girlfriend because we thought it was pretty entertaining. And seeing as I've already made a video recapping the entirety of season 1, I figured I'd be the perfect candidate to answer the question, is this show good or bad? And of course, the answer to that question is it's both. And with that in mind, and considering the fact that human beings always like to receive the bad news first and then the good news, I will start off with the reasons why this show is bad, or essentially the reasons I dislike this show. Starting off, and I know this is a little petty, but I don't really understand the reason for the Brannocks only having one car. They're kind of loaded. They live in the city. Maybe they don't want to pay for extra parking, but Dean has a pretty good job and Nora sells pottery. You'd think they'd be able to afford even a clunker. They should be able to afford 2 cars. I initially thought Nora was never shown making pottery in the show, but my girlfriend pointed out to me that yes, she was making pottery in the show one time. It must have been the one time I turned away from the show for, I don't know, 5-10 seconds. She was making pottery in the basement. But this is also confusing to me because she's got so much pottery that she's able to put on multiple shows and sell a whole bunch of pottery. So why is she only shown making pottery one time throughout the entire show? It's literally her job. Ellie, Dean and Nora's daughter, ends up being super disrespectful, ends up being a liar as well, and I don't really enjoy watching shows where the shows are portraying kids as being completely nasty and disrespectful to their parents. That's just propagating this stereotype in society that children are smarter than their parents or should think that they're smarter than their parents. I really, really hate that. It's like very degenerate for society. Another thing to mention is Dean is Italian and we never get any close-up shots of them eating good Italian food at dinner. Sure, we have some shots of them around the dinner table, but come on, this guy is literally installing a butcher block on top of the island that they have in the house so he can cook really well. I'd love to see some Italian food, and I'm very much let down because I don't get to see any like good close-up shots of like really good Italian food. I want this show to make me hungry, and honestly, it didn't. Nora and Dean go through the tunnel underneath their house. They come upon a room. Obviously, they're continuing to chase this guy who they found in the tunnel, but they could always have come back to the room, taken pictures, collected things from the room, but they didn't, seemingly, or at least the show doesn't show them collecting things or taking pictures of the room, and you'd think that would be one of the things that they could bring to Detective Chamberlain to really light a fire under his ass and get some people out here to investigate, but I don't believe they did that, or at least the show doesn't show us that they did that. Another thing that I think is a really bad societal trend that is kind of forced in this show is the fact that multiple women throughout the show continue to tell Nora to leave Dean, to divorce Dean. Karen being the primary agitator because Karen divorced her husband and everything worked out for her, even though it seems like she is actually miserable. So they're just trying to push Nora away from Dean. And one thing I can say about Nora, good job, Nora, she does not end up leaving Dean. So I appreciate that. I like to think that marriages can last and Nora ends up sticking through. One of the major issues with the show is there are multiple things, multiple issues that seem to just blow over very quickly. They arise and then you never see them again in the show. For instance, Dean and Nora's sex life. Apparently it's a big problem in the first couple episodes, but after that, it's just completely like, oh, they have a troubled sex life? I don't even know that. Like, you don't even end up thinking about that at all after the first like couple episodes. I also hate to continue talking about Ellie, but Ellie uploads a TikTok calling her dad a racist. This, in my opinion, is a huge deal, although there are very little repercussions besides Nora and Dean being expelled from the country club, which doesn't make any sense that that's the only thing that happened to them. Obviously, Ellie is lying, and it just seems to blow over, which is so confusing. And Dakota, the security kid, ended up setting up a camera in Dean and Nora's bedroom. Like, holy guacamole, that's so creepy. And I guess that's overlooked because he got video of a girl getting into bed with Dean. Although nothing happens in the video, Dean is asleep the entire time. So I have no understanding of why this distracted from the fact that Dakota literally set up a camera in Dean and Nora's bedroom. Another glaring issue is the presentation of the same information multiple times to us. So the first example is the phone call made to the hotel that Nora and the kids are staying at actually was made from the house. And we're able to see this in one of the early episodes, but we get presented the information again when Nora discovers that the call was made from the house by going through the call logs. The second example is Dean cashed out everything to pay for the house. We already know this because Dean met with his financial advisor, but later on in the show, Theodora ends up telling Nora that she did some digging and went and investigated at their wealth management firm and figured out that Dean cashed out everything to buy the house, which obviously we already know. The third example is Mitch and Mo's son faked their death in order to be able to collect insurance money. Mitch and Mo end up telling Karen this when Karen comes over to their house to try and convince them to sell their house. But then Mo tells Nora and Pearl at the luncheon the exact same information. And the final example is Roger Kaplan created the Ode to a House assignment. Ellie ends up finding this out by searching up Ode to a House on Facebook, and then Theodora tells Dean and Nora about Roger Kaplan after going and visiting with his ex-wife. I understand that information is sometimes presented twice in order to emphasize that information, but I don't feel like any of these things needed to be repeated twice, or we needed to see them twice. We could have just seen them once and that would have sufficed, especially because in the examples I gave, the information was kind of given to us back to back. And the last negative or bad thing about the show is that the mystery is unsolved. They end up telling you that at the end of the show. A lot of people are frustrated about it. It doesn't really bug me, although it is a little confusing if they're planning on ever resolving the show. I get that they may have wanted to add it for an extra bit of suspense and creepiness, but a lot of people really didn't like that aspect of the end of the show. So now that I've gone over the bad things or the things I didn't like about the show, let's go over the good things or the things I did like about the show. The pacing overall was all over the place, but I think it worked out well. Most of the time, things were very mellow, very calm, but there was just enough suspense and enough fast-paced instances to keep me entertained. I think the character development of Dean kind of turning into this crazy, obsessive person was actually pretty good. I understand his character was a little bit flat, but I do like that he got more and more obsessive about the house as the show went on. Karen, Margot, and Theodora, in comparison to Ellie and Nora, were hilarious and very fun characters to watch. I also enjoyed that the show was suspenseful, but not overly suspenseful. There were also a low amount of jump scares. I really dislike jump scares, and I think they did a good job of interspersing a few throughout the show, but they kept the number down. Andrew Pierce, a previous owner of the house who sat down and talked to Dean about his experience in the house, I thought was a really good actor. He did a really good job of sounding like a complete maniac and just being completely freaked out by the house. I also thought the music in the show was good. Like I said, this show did a good job of balancing suspense and also giving us a little bit of a breather. And the final thing I really liked about this show were the dimly lit, kind of warm scenes where Dean was going over the suspect board, either with Nora or Theodora or both. I felt like it was very detective-y. It made me want to kind of snuggle up and get my tea and think about who the watcher might be. It felt like a puzzle, but it felt very warm and fun. So to answer the question, was the show good or bad? Well, it was a bit of both. It was a mixed bag. Although I do think it was more good than bad, and I know that's a little counter to how the video went, because obviously I went over a lot of negatives and only a few positives, but really I do think the show was a lot better than people give it credit for. It kept me engaged and it was fun and not too suspenseful.